See.
These days, just.
To the discussion session Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025. If you want to get us rolling.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We have a couple appointments to municipal boards, one for financial management, one for resiliency. We have a consideration of a resolution for the sidewalk assessment program for municipal sidewalks. We have the consideration of a conditional use for 360 Castle Shannon Boulevard. That's the new J-Lab property. We had the hearing last time for a warehousing self-storage use. We also have the consideration of the award of the pool filtration replacement contract, the rebid. We have consideration for the purchase of traffic signal control equipment. We talked about that a couple of meetings ago during discussion session. We have the consideration for the award of the 2025 street maintenance program, and also the consideration for the award of the 2025 street reconstruction program.
Impact agenda.
It is.
Great, thank you. What do we got? Zoning ordinance.
Yes, thank you, commissioners. So I have with me today, John Trent from Strategic Solutions. He's going to talk to you all in a bit. I'll give a little preface. So the commission had funded as part of this year's budget, some funding towards updating the zoning ordinance and SALDO, which is the subdivision and land development ordinance. A zoning and SALDO update is typically the compendium piece to a comprehensive plan after a comp plan is adopted, which we adopted our new comp plan in January of last year. So this project queues up very well with that update. And John is here to talk about some high level things of what all goes into a zoning ordinance update, which a few commissioners had requested, both for the group's information and for our large studio audience, and as a resource for those who may be interested in the project to go back and watch the presentation later to see what is a zoning update all about and what are we getting ourselves into in advance of us publishing an RFP. So basically after John's presentation tonight, then the plan for the timeline is that we'll develop the RFP, hopefully release it, I'd say June or so of this year, and then get responses back, review them, and then have a consultant on board probably maybe late third quarter, early fourth quarter of this year to start the project of reviewing and updating our zoning ordinance. So with that, I will turn it over to John to talk to you all about what all is involved in a zoning update. Sure. Sit over here, and I've got your presentation here.
Hi, Frank.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
See you.
Well, I'm excited to have 3 hours to talk about zoning. It's one of my favorite topics. First, we're going to talk about zoning basics, then we're going to talk about what zoning can't do, and then we're going to talk about enforcement. So hour 3, you might either get a coffee. Keith, you ready for your coffee? You ready?
I know all this.
Oh, okay,
I
okay.
realize I'm not the chair, but you have 25 minutes.
Oh, okay, here we go. So what I did, Ian asked me to hit some highlights of zoning to prime the pump as you enter this important project. Nobody cares about zoning until they do, right? So it's an important project, and here we go. Municipalized Planning Code, don't forget about it. If you don't know about it, you should know about it. I've been doing a lot of training lately to remind folks that Municipalized Planning Code exists because there are lots of plans and ordinances out there that seem to forget that it exists. In Pennsylvania, if we're going to zone, you are already zoned and you're going to amend your ordinance, you must do so in a way that's consistent with Municipalized Planning Code. Not a fun document to read, but still important. As Ian mentioned, the zoning, your zoning ordinance and your SALDO implement your comprehensive plans. You've got a great, shiny, new comprehensive plan that you're actively implementing, and these ordinances will be an important part of implementing that plan. The Municipalities Planning Code specifically says that there is a direct tie from the comp plan to the zoning ordinance. So as you go through the zoning ordinance, think about it as how your comp plan becomes life, how it becomes reality in terms of use and development of land in your community. In your comprehensive plan, there is a statement of community development objectives. That is the literal tie to your zoning ordinance. So you want to think about what your comp plan says specifically about future development, future land use, and how that translates into your zoning ordinance. Your zoning ordinance should tie very directly and specifically to your development objectives as outlined in your comprehensive plan per the Municipalities Planning Code. An important thing to remember is that it's just one tool in the toolbox. So as you embark on this project, it is weighty. There are lots of topics covered. And often it becomes an effort to solve all challenges that your community is facing by throwing everything into the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance is just one tool that your community has, and that tool focuses on the use of property, and I'll emphasize that later. But you have a lot of other tools as well: property maintenance code, your enforcement of your ordinances, your building code. There are lots of things that go into that toolbox to implement that comprehensive plan. The zoning and subdivision ordinances are just two of those tools. Zoning is not the building code. So remember that as you focus on your zoning ordinance and what uses can go where and how, the building code regulates the construction that might be related to those uses. And want to avoid bringing building code requirements into your zoning ordinance. Similarly, property maintenance code is not your zoning ordinance, and vice versa. So if you've got issues around high grass and weeds, junk vehicles, et cetera, you've got ordinances that handle all that. If that needs to be updated, that's a separate process, but the zoning ordinance doesn't manage those things. And I also want to think about enforcement, because often ordinances are drafted without enforcement in mind, and your zoning officer or officers are faced with a challenging task of enforcing those words on the paper, and the municipality's planning code says they have to do it literally, black and white. So if it's not clear what's written in your ordinance, they're faced with an uphill battle to enforce that ordinance to make sure that use and development in your community happens in a way consistent with what the ordinance requires. And you're the zoning officer.
No, Rodney is.
Oh, Rodney, that's right. So think of Rodney as you work on your ordinance. A good zoning ordinance does four things: what, where, when, and how. Answers those four questions. The what is the defined terms. None of this, unless you're a wonky municipal geek like me, really gets you excited. But the definitions, the defined terms in your ordinance, as boring as they are, is really where a lot of the action is around zoning. So you're going to spend a lot of time talking about what uses are allowed in your community and how you define those uses. I have been doing zoning, local government, for 26 years now. Zoning's been a large part of that. I'm still amazed at the uses that, tomorrow I'll get a call, somebody wants to shear llamas in their backyard and make pillows out of the fur from the llamas. What do we call that, right? And that's the question that your zoning officer faces every day. Is that a home-based business? I don't think the neighbors would agree that that's a no-impact home-based business. So you're going to spend some time thinking about what uses are, how they are defined, then where they are allowed. So you have many zoning districts in your current zoning map and zoning ordinance. A good zoning ordinance clearly defines what uses are allowed in each zoning district. Then the when. When do I have to get a permit? So is it a conditional use? What does that process look like? When do I apply? How do I apply? And the fourth question is how, in terms of the requirements around that use. So for example, if my use, my llama shearing, pillow making use is allowed, but as a conditional use, what are the specific requirements? How can I do that use on my property? So that question needs to be answered clearly. Otherwise, you get into a confusing conditional use hearing process. There are three types of permitted uses: use by right, special exception, and conditional use. It is often a misnomer that special exceptions and conditional uses somehow are not permitted, even if they are listed in your ordinance. Municipality's planning code says all three of those uses are permitted as your ordinance defines. So you're going to categorize your various uses as a use by right, special exception, or conditional use. Uses by right, if I meet all the requirements in your ordinance as listed, then Rodney issues the permit and away I go. Conditional uses and special exceptions are a little different. They have hearings. You guys have one on your agenda, or did have one, a conditional use. So those come to the elected officials. The special exceptions go to the zoning hearing board. There are additional requirements in your ordinance. So if you are going to categorize uses in your new ordinance as special exceptions or conditional uses, you want to make sure they have clearly defined criteria. So when they get to the public hearing, you can understand how that application does or doesn't meet those clear requirements. Also, as you're working on your zoning ordinance, think about change of use versus new construction. Oftentimes zoning is only thought about in terms of the construction or redevelopment of a property within the community. But every time a space is occupied in your community by a use, that use needs to get reviewed and approved to make sure it's permitted per your zoning ordinance. So strip malls, think of a strip mall as an example, or a multi-tenant building. You might have multiple uses that are allowed in that zoning district, and that one building might contain multiple different uses that are allowed maybe in different ways. So each of those tenant spaces needs to get zoning approval, even though they're within an existing building, not just a newly constructed Chick-fil-A or a bank or whatever that is. I mentioned the important question of where, in terms of where I'm allowed to do the uses, what zoning districts is the use that I would like to do allowed in the community. That's accomplished through designation of zoning districts. The municipality currently has several zoning districts. One word of caution, I won't name names, but there's an example on this slide of a community that's got a whole cornucopia of zoning districts. The word of caution here is to not have too many districts such that you don't know the difference from one to the other. There needs to be a clear purpose for each of those districts, and the uses that you allow in those districts and how you allow them should be consistent with that unique purpose for that unique district. The challenge is if the ordinance is challenged and there's ambiguity amongst and between the various business or retail or residential districts, that weakens your ability to defend your ordinance. You want to have clear purposes for those zoning districts and make sure the uses that you allow are consistent with that purpose. Overlay districts. All of these slides, by the way, are all the hot topics that I see around the Commonwealth. I picked and choose ones that I thought, based on my conversation with Ian, might help to prime the pump, so to speak. This one's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, so I'm going to put an asterisk on it and say that this is just a personal pet peeve. Just avoid overlay districts if you could. For me, they're difficult to, and for Rodney and any future zoning officer, they're difficult to enforce. They don't exist in municipalities planning code. There's some language in there that you could rely on if you wanted to create overlay districts, but they are not a specifically authorized thing by the MPC. Doesn't mean if you have them, they're illegal, but they are often used in ways that are a little too creative and create confusion in terms of what I can or can't do with the property. If you get so far along in your new zoning ordinance and you just feel hell-bent on doing an overlay district, some points here: have a clear purpose for that district, have a clear boundary so that we know where the zoning district overlay is. It's not just floating out there sort of in the ether, which happens all the time. Have specific regulations for that overlay district and help us understand with very specific language how that overlay district interfaces with the base zoning district requirements, because they often create conflicts. So what prevails, the overlay or the base district, or do I use the more strict requirement? The ordinance, if you have an overlay, should be clear about that.
And to John's point, the last time that we updated our zoning ordinance, I was municipal planner. We had 28 overlay districts. And I looked at it and I went, why? Because we had literally individual parcels that had a letter H that were designated for a hotel. Well, nobody was ever going to build a hotel there. So when we updated the zoning ordinance the last time, we now have 3. We have an office boutique overlay that's up here on Washington Road, some of the single family residentials that are, as you enter into the central business district, have those uses. We have a mixed use overlay that would be for the Cosman parcel, one up on Bower Hill for the building that's next to the Rite Aid. And then we have a continuing care overlay that took in some of our, years ago, we called them institutional properties. We've since transitioned that. So we're down to 3. And their intent is really to create that softer transition between residential into a higher intensity use. So, but.
And the language in the MPC specifically talks about doing creative things at transition points. So to Keith's point, that's a perfectly great use of an overlay district. Just don't do any.
28 sounds pretty nice.
Parcel by parcel. Principal use versus accessory use. There are a lot of hot topics. There's always hot topics in zoning. And for example, right now and for many years now, accessory dwelling units are a hot topic. But the base point of this slide to remember is the difference between principal and accessory. Principal is the primary use and structure. Accessory is the clear words are clearly incidental and subordinate to, and commonly found in connection with an existing principal use. So you can't build a garage on a lot by itself. If it's a one-car garage for residential. So if your kid wants to come back and move into the upstairs of that garage and that picture, what is that? How does your ordinance allow it? Is it an accessory dwelling unit? Do you want to allow it? Where do you want to allow it? So making sure you understand principal versus accessory, and remember that as you throw these uses into places for redevelopment or reuse is important. Just because despite my best efforts in pleading, often uses by right, conditional use and special exceptions still get mixed and misused. So I repeated the slide in here in terms of the approval processes. You all have been through all these processes and I'm sure are familiar with it. And then threw in there the variance process that's specific to the zoning ordinance. Subdivision land development is subject to modifications and conditional uses or modifications and waivers which come to the elected officials, not the zoning hearing board. It's a good idea as you go through your zoning process to understand all the various permitting procedures that your community uses. Oftentimes zoning ordinances become a collection of planners, great ideas, lacking in implementation / legalese. And it becomes a bureaucratic process and nobody understands really what the intended outcome is and why am I going through this process. So whole new zoning ordinance is an opportunity for you to clearly define what your permitting processes are, what they accomplish, and how I move my way through them. We always recommend doing a simple chart or a detailed chart, however fancy you want to get, but on the slide here illustrates typical land development process, subdivision process, conditional use, special exception, variance, and zoning. For the average Joe and Jane that just want to put a addition on the back of their house, what process do I have to go through? Versus whole new redevelopment or redevelopment, what's that process look like?
For our current ordinance, we define land development as anything larger than a single family home. So even if you wanted to come in and just build one new single family home, you would just need to do the last one on there, which is just the zoning permit. But anything larger than that has to go through the land development process, which is how it's currently done, but we can review that as we go through this zoning update process as well.
Is there like a square footage on that or no?
No, it's single family detached dwelling is not land development. Anything bigger than that is land development.
So if somebody wanted to build a 4-unit,
That's land development.
if somebody wanted to build a 20,000 square foot single family house.
But,
That's not land development.
but isn't there some restriction on building a house square footage wise that it has to be within or
Yes,
close
there's-
to what the others are?
Yeah, there's
And the loophole
area
is
and
unless
bulk
you put in a
limitations.
different-
Yeah.
You know, that
There's
house-
area and bulk limitations on a new single family home, but I'm just talking about process wise,
Yeah, no, but.
whether or not it's land development.
Area, there is.
Are there area limitations for total square feet?
For single family homes, yes. Yep, but if you were allowed to build a 20,000 foot single family home based on the area and bulk limitations, it would still not need to go through the planning board. You can
Right.
just do it by a zoning permit.
A well-drafted zoning ordinance that clearly answers those 4 questions that I mentioned earlier results in an application that if it's the type of application comes to the municipal governing body, for example, like a conditional use, there are really only 3 clear options for you to consider. You're going to either deny the application, approve the application, or approve it with conditions. And there are parameters in the municipality's planning code as to what those conditions should be. And the ordinance should have really clearly defined requirements around, for example, the conditional use, what's required for that. Section 603 on the next slide is what gives you the outline in terms of the conditions that are reasonable to attach to an application. And the most important thing is they have to be rooted in the purpose of the zoning ordinance. So it's not necessarily recommended to attach conditions to an approval that have nothing to do with zoning, require a certain ownership type or something that's not about the use of the property. Zoning and Saldo, Ian at the beginning talked about these 2 separate ordinances. They are required to be separate for the municipality's planning code, 2 separate sections of the MPC. They do 2 very different things. So they're both fruit, I like to say, but one is apples and one is oranges, and you really can't cross the streams. A lot of times the streams get crossed if you have a land development review process on a larger application. You're certainly going to review that against your zoning requirements. You have to remember to keep them separate. They're separate ordinances. They're enforced differently. Relief is given differently from those two types of ordinances. Saldo is focused on the form of construction, so construction details, lot layout, street design, whereas zoning, as I've said a couple of times now, is all about the use. What can I do and where can I do it? In terms of roles, we've mentioned a couple of times, I've mentioned about the role of the governing body in terms of adopting the comp plan, approving conditional uses with or without conditions. Your planning commission has certainly a big role in developing the ordinance and then reviewing applications for development or use against those new ordinances. The zoning hearing board issues variances. It's important to think about how you're going to incorporate the information you can get from your zoning hearing board around what variances have been granted in the past, and that should inform the development of the new ordinance. We've talked about the zoning officer and the importance of enforcement and make sure that ordinance requirements are clear. And the county planning agency also has a role in terms of providing review and advice or guidance through the process as you get closer to adoption. Your municipal staff, you've got great, capable municipal staff in-house that both manages the applications and enforces the ordinances, both zoning and saldo. And I mentioned earlier, section 614 of the municipalized planning code says that the zoning officer has to enforce the ordinance with its literal terms. So if you don't understand the ordinance as you're reviewing a draft, then it's fairly certain that average Joe and Jane public aren't going to understand it, and or a developer who has an application in front of you might challenge that language if it's ambiguous. So clear, enforceable language should always be the goal as you draft a new ordinance. Hot topics, whether it's the llama shearing or accessory dwelling units, wind farms, you name it, solar farms, there's lots of zoning hot topics out there. When I ask 3 questions, what is it, where does it go, and how is it regulated? So as you tackle those specific uses, you want to make sure your ordinance answers those 3 uses clearly. And I'm 3 minutes over, so I will stop there and ask if there's any questions. If there's
An additional comment on uses too. I believe that for the most part, we have a savings clause in there that said that there's a use not listed, then it's a conditional use in one of the zoning districts. But for the most part, you should try and define as many uses as possible, because if you don't define, as John mentioned, what is it, where does it go, and how is it regulated, then if a developer challenges your ordinance, they could potentially win in court and be allowed to put that use anywhere. Versus one of the previous communities I worked in had a adult-oriented business that challenged the zoning ordinance and said, because it's not specifically listed in here, we should be allowed to put it anywhere in town that we want to. And that community won in court because there actually was a clause that they were able to fall back on that covered that. So, but that's why defining a number of different uses, as John mentioned, is really important, because the easier you can make it for people to find what their use is in the code, the easier it is to say, okay, what is it, where does it go, and how is it regulated?
Can you prohibit any use?
No, you have to at least, oh, you're the professional. No, you have to at least, back to the 3 kind of levels that John mentioned, whether it's a use by right conditional use or use by special exception. You can make something a use by special exception, which is kind of the hardest hurdle to clear, but you still have to list it as one of those 3.
Yeah, we also pay attention to, I'll say, industry trends. Bill and I worked when we did the zoning ordinance last time, there were no such things as brew pubs, right?
Right, sure.
That was a new concept.
New
Well, as we saw those starting to appear other places, Bill and I got together, we had a resident here actually that was interested, and drafted some, I'll say, regulations to then amend our zoning ordinance to provide for those. So that then we had some, I'll say, level of control, if you will, over that. The other thing we did the last time before we updated the zoning ordinance was to sort of poll, it would have been Joe Barkley at that point in time, the zoning officer and say, hey, what are you typically seeing in terms of variance requests? Well, for the last update, that was related to the location of an air conditioning condensing unit. We used to have a requirement that they be at least 15 feet from a property line. Well, that's when they were older, noisier, and bigger.
Sure. Yeah.
So we changed that, reduced that down to 7.5 feet
Yeah.
for residential, and it eliminated,
A lot of
probably
variance.
75% of those variance requests.
Yeah.
So again, just sort of being proactive, recognizing what we're hearing
Smart.
out in the public and what we're hearing from the residents as well.
Makes a lot of sense.
I just have a couple comments, but they're not related to John's stuff here. One was the memo that Ian issued related to the zoning project overall. There were some recommendations for, who's involved, like commission champions, Ian is the municipal planner, things like that. All that sounded good. The one, I would just add a comment related to the advisory committee. I would expand that beyond municipal boards, authorities, and partner organizations. I would expand that to include members of the public. I think we want to get point of view and coordination between, normal everyday residents, not just people with planning experience or people who are already engaged in the planning process. Kind of like what we did with the DEI boards and some of that. So I would add, I don't know how we source that, we call for applications or whatnot, but, try to add that members of the public to that. Just separately, as I was going through our zoning, pages, so I would recommend that we create a separate page of the website for the zoning project. We can put, like a public facing webpage that outlines the process that we're going through, some of which was detailed in Ian's memo. Ian also put in his memo a projected timeline that I'm sure will change, but something that lists the timeline that could be there, I would probably put that on there. And then I think it would be a great place to put some of the documents that we all receive that are public, which are sometimes hard to find, and like some of the stuff that John is putting up now,
Yes, right
the
now,
process, I think are great. Some of the stuff that John has in his presentation, some of the graphics, I think we should put directly on our site. I don't know if we can do that, but
You're free to.
some of them, like the process map he had up there about which things go to which person for approval. I think that stuff is really helpful for the public to see, and that can go on something separate. Right now, it's inspections, permits, and zoning. And there's really not a ton about zoning on that page. So I would probably just separate zoning in general. We could have our zoning map on there. We have one link to the zoning code from the inspections, permits, and zoning page. It might be more clear, separated out, that kind of thing on its own page. On our planning page, we have just a very quick introduction. It's like a 1-sentence introduction about what planning is. We might be able to put things on that page that explain the different types of things you might go to planning for, rather than just we quickly link them off to so like 1 sentence and here's the code. It just doesn't say good luck. I mean, that's kind of like what the page is, but I think we should maybe add some of this stuff. And again, some of the stuff that John is putting here now, we should put there. In fairness, it's not like we didn't do this stuff on purpose. We moved, when we did the website, we moved a lot of pages. There were hundreds of pages to go through. Laura, I'm sure, has looked at thousands of them. Just as we dig into these projects, we see some of the pages, we can probably, beef them up a little bit, that kind of thing.
To your point, when we think about what a municipality does, this is one of the absolute core functions
Absolutely.
of local government.
Right.
If we aren't effectively communicating this, right, honestly, recreation's nice, but you don't have to do recreation. Someone else can do recreation. We have to do this. So how do we do this as effectively as possible and communicate it? Communicate the process that we are going through, and Craig, to your point, communicate in the future, to residents, how this works and why it works. I think is really a good point.
I'm going to recommend that the column that you wrote on zoning. Your commissioner's column was an excellent introduction, basic level of what it is. And I think those kind of things to have on that website are important too. I really do. Some people have absolutely, see, there you go, educator of the year. Some people have absolutely no idea what we're talking about, so it'd be really important to put that in.
Is it too early to pick commission champions for this? I see that was in your memo as well.
If the group would like to designate someone.
I just know two people. I'm just looking at two people expressed interest. We're obviously terming out the end of this year. This is gonna go at least a year. So I thought two people just spoke up, might be good commission champions.
I nominate Jeff Nan.
You understand? It's, but you should have two. It's a big deal. But I mean, the two of you, you understand it. But, so.
I'm gonna hand and Jeff begrudgingly because I am.
Jeff promised me drinks. So there's nothing.
One note I'll add, I agree with everything you said, Commissioner Grella. When I structure the RFP,
Yeah.
my general approach to RFPs is usually to leave them as broad as possible so that we get
Mhm.
different responses back. But I can definitely make sure to highlight in the RFP that we want to know how the consultant proposes to communicate things. It's like when we did the
Right.
comprehensive plan,
Right.
the Pashik who did the plan, part of their proposal for the plan was, we're gonna make a whole website just dedicated to the comp plan and have all this information on it. Some of the other responses to the comp plan RFP didn't have that. And that was, one of the things that helped us decide in their favor. So I think leaving it open to see how different consultants propose to help communicate it. Last year when I went to the planning conference, the statewide planning conference, I went to a presentation from the planner at State College Borough. They did some really unique things with GIS when they
Yeah.
did their zoning update to help kind of visualize things. But
Right.
so I'm interested to see what prospective consultants bring to the table as far as communication, but I agree, we should definitely make sure that we're communicating it well in partnership with whatever
We
consultant
always
we
have
pick.
community engagement on any of our RFPs,
Well,
in my
it-
memory.
And to that point, right, part of this, exercise, which I think is really interesting, John, you pointed it out, was that as we go through this, process, this is as much about redesigning the process to engage with zoning as it is the zoning code itself.
Right.
Right,
Right, yeah.
and so what are the end results that we're trying to accomplish, on these properties, right? And again, I go back to, we need to encourage capital investment into these properties. That is ultimately what we are trying to accomplish in one way, shape, or form. How do you do that, right? It's not just saying, what can you do on a piece of property? It's, making that process as clean and as simple and as efficient as possible. And I really hope that that's part of the consultant's, engagement, is not just what is the output, but how do you engage with it post adoption?
Yeah, I think it's really important because
Yeah.
the code itself is legalese for the most part, because it has to be, right? So,
Okay.
I think the lead up to that, or even the engagement with that, the more, like you said, plain English that we can make that, the better. Because we do, at some point, we have to pass people to the code, right? Whether it's developers or homeowners or people who are seeking to do something for which compliance with some level of the zoning code is required. Like, we have to make them aware of it. They have to understand it. If they can't understand it, we've got things in place like meetings with Rodney, meetings with Ian on land development, or they have to hire people who do understand it.
Right,
Lawyers, engineers, architects,
right.
but I think the more that we can do to help them understand how they can possibly engage with it, the different ways they can engage with it, and then plain language summaries, page, 2 pages, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And hopefully they can do that for us.
Yeah,
Or suggest.
that for me, I think is, again, as we went through the comp plan process, right, realigning the boards was a
Right.
very robust component of the comp plan process, so that we had an idea of how this comp plan would be implemented over time. It wasn't just, hey, we're gonna do the
Right.
document and then we're gonna forget about it and staff are gonna take care of it. No, we thought about having a boards that were going to
Right.
engage in certain ways. So how do we do that, right, in this process as well? Because again, we could conceptually, say, look, our zoning doesn't change, or we could make it more simple, right? We could go, and say, look, I don't care what you do on your property, as long as it has this density
Right.
and this height, you do whatever you wanna do. makes it really easy. But that there obviously might be drawbacks to that as well. So
Yes.
so how do we think about, right, the balancing between, you know, what we want the code to be? Because the more complex, it is inherently the more complex the process is. So if I can simplify the zoning requirements, I can simplify the process, but there's a balance there.
Agreed, and to that point, I think it's one of those areas where we let the tail wag the dog. It's the process drives the outcome, and that never results, you know, that never ends in great results. So I think it's complex. I mean, that's a tough thing to figure out because we're so process oriented municipalities, but we need to figure out what kind of outcomes we're looking for. What do we want to see constructed? What kind of neighborhood do we want? And work backwards from there instead of, again, just adopting a process. Like, let's see what happens, which never seems to satisfy anybody.
But we have this issue a lot, right? We talk about, you know, what do we want to have, or sometimes we don't talk about what this
Sure.
group actually wants to see or wants to happen. You know, we will hire, like I feel we got into this with like, less so the Parks Master Plan, but you know, like some of the rec center planning and some of the main park site planning where I don't think this group here really gave a solid vision of what we wanted. And I think we kind of went through these steps where we're like, we don't like that. It's like, we know what we don't like when we see it,
Right.
but we can't put our thumb on what do we actually want to see. I feel like we're going through that same thing with some of the transportation and mobility stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
what do we want to happen with mobility in municipality? You know, and what do we want to see? And what we fall back on is individual practical items because somebody brought forward a motion or a complaint. And then we get this patchwork of stuff because this body hasn't tackled the idea or the vision of what do our streets look like.
Yeah, exactly.
Communities do grow organically. So you have to be open to the fact that there will be changes and new layers of things that go on in communities, including roads, sidewalks, uses, et cetera, et cetera. They're growing organisms.
Agreed, but I think you have to we should make some decisions on where we want to arrive, so at least we
Yeah.
can start to map a route instead of sort of small decision by small decision, we'll just see where we end up.
Keith, one of the things you mentioned, like with the brew pubs, I would have immediately said it's a bar and treated it that way. So how far in the weeds do you end up having to go?
Well, the difference with the brew pub was the on-site brewing that some of them were doing.
Yeah, sure,
That added a new component. That doesn't happen at a bar.
right.
So we had to put some, I'll say, controls in to address that issue. Now, we had one that actually started doing that and then transitioned into a larger facility. They moved their brewing
Yeah,
off-site. But again, it's just each new, I'll say, business and industry. The other one we've talked about that we'll address with this zoning ordinance update is the popularity of Airbnbs,
Yes,
right? That wasn't a thing
I know.
20 years ago, right? So as those things start to become popular and become part of the fabric of a community, we need to be proactive and put in the regulations to ensure that, you know, we're gonna put the proper protections in, but still provide for the use, so.
Right, it's certainly gonna take a creative firm, I think, to work with us to nail some of this down, and so good luck on that RFP.
And to that point, shortly after I started working here, we did a small update to the zoning ordinance. That was back around. I started in 2016, so that was probably 2017, 2018. We did that. But that was right after the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania legalized medical marijuana facilities. So we had to add in some regulations at that point in time around medical marijuana facilities, because that was a use that was previously prohibited at the state level, but then was allowed for. So we had to make an adjustment to our zoning code to, you know, describe, as John said, how, where, and what it can be. And
Vape shops.
With a great article, I think it was the Atlantic that just came out in the last week or so about the dispensaries and the medical
Mhm.
marijuana
Mhm.
licenses that were issued are now almost all owned by two companies.
Nice.
Yep,
That's-
I'm
well,
just,
thank you very much, John.
Yeah, absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good luck. Good luck.
Thank you.
You should. Oh, nice.
I'm here all night. So next.
I'm excited about it, we see.
Started.
Next up, we have a discussion of the 2025 bond issue. So the commission has discussed this at a few prior discussion sessions. Finance Director Andrew McCreary is here with me to continue that discussion. The goal of tonight's discussion is to land on a sizing number for the bond. Back at the March 25th discussion session, when Andrew, along with our rep from PNC Capital Markets, came in, discussed three potential sizes: $5 million, $7.5 million, and $9.2 million. There was a list of potential projects at that point in time. So just kind of throwing it out there to the group. I know I sent a memo to try and summarize some things. Are there thoughts between those three numbers, between the list of projects that was presented, so on and so forth?
I mean, just if we, I know the recommendation was, 7.5 million. I think Andrew described that as the sweet spot. If we choose to allocate more money in the bond, I would suggest adding more to the South Garage parking project. That is going to be an incredibly expensive project. And going even from 7.5 up to 9.2, I'm sure isn't going to cover it, but it just gets us started for a big project we have to address before the whole thing falls down.
How do you feel about that?
It's fine with me. We're gonna need the money, so.
We're gonna what? We're gonna need
We're gonna need the
money.
money.
And we have 18 months to spend it or something like that?
3 years.
3 years, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
3 years.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
Well,
Here.
all right, but I mean, Andrew, in all reality, right, we're gonna go back out to the market the next couple of years anyway.
Yeah.
So
So, yeah,
we don't need to sit on cash. There's no reason, and this is not, the money is not cheap right now.
okay,
So
So
there's no
7.5.
reason to overextend.
okay.
We can go back out to market if we need to, knowing that we are gonna need to in the next couple of
Yeah,
years, so.
anyways,
If things accelerate quickly, there's nothing saying you can't go out to market early in 26.
okay,
Right, so you're talking less
Right.
than 12 months away. You have a new calendar year and those types of things. Andrew's right, Commissioner Flynn's right. We don't need to be sitting on the cash. We have shovel-ready projects on the docket, ready to go.
mhm,
There are things that are happening at the South Garage. As we get closer to that,
mhm.
you guys are gonna have maintenance requests this year for hundreds of thousands of dollars to make sure it's standing up and doing what it's supposed to be doing and making sure it's a safe structure. So you're gonna have those things before you. So the sooner we can have cash in hand to help facilitate some of those things that you may want to do with this garage is helpful. There's nothing saying is that as you move forward, you couldn't repurpose it for other things. That's why we decided to give you the option for other things like Bradfordton Field, right? So while not shovel ready for 25, it could be something that, hey, if you wanted to do that in 26 and use some of those funds for it, you would have the availability to do so. But I think the sweet spot is 7.5 million, and where we need to be. So, I think we're gonna be going out for 3, possibly 4 bond issues in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
And when I got hired, speaking of when we get hired, we'd done a bond issue every year. And this includes refinancing, but we had done one every 18 of 20, the last 20 years. Up and through to 2017. We've done one every 18 of 20 years. So we're not unfamiliar to the market.
Right,
Our debt sells well. We're gonna have the opportunity to do it at multiple points here in the next 5 years.
I'm okay with some of that.
Yeah, honestly, as long as staff says that these are
Yeah.
projects that can be spent the next, I'd say 18 months,
Yeah.
I really don't, there's nothing I'm saying no to.
Right,
It's really just a question of, borrow what you need to get the work done.
let's do it.
With the exception of the South Garage project, you will be seeing, tonight you're going to award the full filtration bid, but you will see the rest of these projects
Come up.
come before you with numbers.
Fine. Go for it. Sounds great.
All right, 7.5 is
Easy enough.
determination and,
7.5.
okay.
Take care.
Got it, okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. We're now ahead of schedule. The next up, the Woodland Drive Sidewalk Project. So I know I've presented a lot to the commission on this topic, many previous discussion sessions. So just as a quick summary, the commission's allocated approximately $460,000 in funding for the sidewalk project on Woodland. through multiple budget cycles. There's 29 properties overall. So far, we've have, I believe, 18 of those have signed agreements with the municipality to participate in the cost sharing formula. There's 11 outstanding. And my anticipation is probably around the end of this week, sending out additional notifications based on the information I'm about to provide, which is that we put the project out to bid. Bids were received last week. So the engineer is still reviewing those bids to make sure they're accurate. We received 6 bids. The low bid received was about $429,000, so it was under budget. The engineer is still reviewing the bids, so some things can change. I did talk with them this morning. They said one of the bidders, not the low bidder, but one of the other ones withdrew their bid because they had some calculations that were to the magnitude of $100,000 wrong in their bid. And when they recalculated, they decided to withdraw their proposal. So, but it was not the one that was the low bidder, but that's why I kind of said that the engineer is still reviewing all the bids, make sure they're accurate, all that stuff. So we'll have a follow-up presentation once we have the actual number of the project. My intention is once I get word from the engineer, hopefully by the end of this week, of what the actual low bid amount is, to send out notification letters to those 29 properties. Again, unique letters to each property owner informing them what the cost sharing breakdown is for their property. For those 11 that we've not received signed contracts from yet, I'll send a copy of the contract again and inform them of, if you sign the contract, you're eligible for the 90-10 cost sharing formula, where the municipality pays 90% of the sidewalk and the property owner pays 10% per the language in our adopted sidewalk policy. And if you don't sign the contract, then the property owner has to pay 100%, also per our ordinance and the language in the sidewalk policy.
And what is the deadline for them to return the letters?
Great question. So that would bring us to the next steps, which is the commission is going to have to make 2 votes at a commission meeting. And I'm actually going to change what I said in my memo. So based on my conversation with the engineer this morning. So the 2 votes, the first vote is to actually award the contract to the low bidder, whoever that happens to be. And then the second vote is to approve a resolution to order the sidewalks in place. So the deadline for filing resident agreements is when the commission passes the resolution. Because at that point in time, with the passage of the resolution, the commission will also accept those agreements which have been filed up to that date.
Okay, so
So
can we warn them
that's
another
going to
week
be my
ahead of time?
intent. Yeah, when I send the letter, I'm going to say this is the deadline.
Drop dead date. We
Yes.
don't have them by then, you're out of luck.
Correct. So this is the change from my memo. So based on my conversation with the engineer this morning, they recommended awarding the contract at the May 13th commission meeting.
Okay,
So that gives the contractor about a month to mobilize, get ready, because we wanted to target that week of June 9th to start the project, because that's
Right.
after school's over. And we've said all along that
Right.
the purpose of the sidewalk is because people walk to school there. We don't want to be doing construction while school's in session, so we want to try and start it right when
Right.
school ends. So giving the contractor that month in advance to notify them, hey, you're the low bidder, you got the contract, we sign all the documents, you get your insurance, your bonds, all that. Then, consistent with my memo, passing the resolution at the May 27th commission meeting, that then we'll have the contract award on the 13th. Passing the resolution at the May 27th meeting gives us the opportunity to, send out those letters to residents, hopefully by the end of this week, but then that gives them a little bit more time to get back to us to respond, to ask us any questions they might have before that drop dead date of May 27th. Now, that said, considering that May 26th is Memorial Day, my recommendation would be that we tell residents they have to have their signed agreements in by end of business on Friday, May 23rd.
yes, I think that's fair. Could you remind me what the ad alternate was?
Yes, so the ad alternate, there are some municipal street trees along Woodland that may or may not be impacted by the sidewalk installation.
Okay.
And we won't know for sure until the sidewalk is in, because we're gonna have to tear up some dirt. We don't know for sure how much of the root system necessarily is under where the sidewalk's gonna be. So that gives, the ad alternate was for removal of municipal street trees, not for private trees, but for municipal street trees. That depending on how the work may impact them, we may have to remove. But we have an arborist with Gateway, a landscape architect with Gateway, and then our own municipal street tree division of the Public Works Department, along with Rudy Suko, our Public Works Director. They've all walked the street, looked at them and said, these ones are kind of borderline, we're not sure, but we put that in as an add alternate to kind of give us the option of if we have to remove them, based on what the landscape architect and arborist and Gateway said, that because we're putting the sidewalk on, the street side of where the tree is, that if you take those roots out, it could potentially start leaning towards the property, and we don't want trees to start leaning towards residential properties. So that's gonna kind of be a assessment as we go.
Do we have to do the, the bend in the sidewalk around any of the trees, or are we gonna be able to do it all in a straight shot?
There may have been, I don't remember specifically, there might be a couple bends.
We're doing some tree protection
Yeah.
in the form of like wells almost around the trees.
Okay,
Some
but does it
cases.
change the trajectory of the
No,
sidewalk?
the sidewalk's still
Still
getting
straight,
consistent,
okay.
but we may limit the sidewalk to 3 feet wide.
Is that still wide enough for the wheelchairs? Gotta make sure it is.
Yeah, I think 36 inches is.
36 inches, I can't remember what the ADA room is. But please, make sure. Thank you. Okay, I'm
It's
done.
36 inches.
36
Yeah.
inches, yeah, I just can't remember all the time.
And since you have some time,
Yes.
Probably not a good thing for you.
Here,
Don't worry, he'll fill it.
when we send the residents the notification about the cost sharing, will there also be notification that indicates items that are within the public right of way, but that are the residents' responsibility in terms of, I'll say, relocating,
Yes.
moving, removing?
Yes. Yes, yeah, that's part of, I had a call with Gateway today and we broke down all the items that were, all the line items that were within the bid of which ones are part of that 90-10 cost sharing formula, which ones are the residents' responsibility based on our sidewalk policy, which ones are municipal responsibility, like road signs and things like that, that are our responsibility to take care of. So we broke that all down. So we'll have that breakdown to be able to provide to each resident based on the what's on their property.
Can you, I know this is maybe overkill, can you put in the concept of right of way? I don't think people understand sometimes that you can't build stuff in right of ways. You're not supposed to. I mean, I know things go in, but that it's not allowed. And I feel like sometimes, you get yelled at for it. People are yelling at me going, what? And I'm like, look, means we get to do what we want in there. But anyways.
It's usually 13 feet from back from the
Yeah,
curb, which
yeah.
is surprising to most people.
I know it is. It's very surprising how much of a right of way there is. Yeah, it's a huge number, but just some kind of explanation maybe.
Yes.
I think that's beneficial. To your
Yeah.
point, a lot of people don't
They
understand.
just don't understand what it is, this is the way it works.
Pick up my grass on the right of way.
Why do I have to shovel my sidewalk?
So,
And we'll also include, from all the residents that I've talked to, I've gotten a number of questions on, about the cost sharing formula, that we are not mandating that each individual property owner provide us a check for their property. If the residents on
Right.
Woodland would like
Right.
to get together, go door to door, raise funds, have a
Sure.
bake sale, have a garage sale, whatever they might want to do, if they want to, raise funds in other ways that collectively can help pay for the sidewalk as a whole. We're gonna have each number for each property, but if, the residents as a whole give us a check and say, hey, split this up between these 10 properties because we did a, neighborhood bake sale or whatever, and these 10 participated, we can figure that out. So
Okay.
we're not necessarily mandating that each property has to write us a check for their
Check.
specific amount.
Okay.
We're just saying, here's the total amount of resident money that's due into the project based on the sidewalk policy, the ordinance, and the cost sharing formula
Okay.
that's contained therein.
when would they go in? Sidewalks, when would they actually be constructed?
The target is to start in June.
June.
Taking 30 days.
So from the May 13th meeting, then
Someone can put their own sidewalk in. That's
Oh, I
how
knew
it
they
works.
can, yeah.
You gotta give them 30 days.
So you're saying we should pass the resolution on May 13th also then?
Okay,
All right.
resolution on May 13th too. Okay.
If the
That's fine.
commission's okay with that, yep.
Yeah. Okay with that?
And that moves the deadline up to.
No, we're just doing the resolution at the same time. we're
May
doing the
9th would be
contract.
No, no, if we make the resolution
June
on May 10th, is the deadline for turning in their agreements still later?
Oh.
Or is it May
No,
1st?
it would be, I would say it would be, we're here Monday, May 12th. So I'd say Monday, May 12th, close of business.
Yeah,
And then pass the resolution on May 13th.
okay.
So then if the contractor starts on June 16th, that would be
Enough time,
30
yeah.
days. Yep.
Uh-huh.
Also identify for residents the time frame for the
Yes.
payment of their share, because I think we talked
Yeah.
about a 3-year.
Yes, you're correct.
terms and
Uh-huh.
conditions.
Yeah, the policy allows for residents to do it over a 3-year period if they want to, so we'll have to get some clarification from everyone on how they intend to submit, but yes, that does. The policy does allow for that. And then that also then gives us some time too, that I know there's a number of residents down there that I've talked to that have some private systems within their yards, whether it's dog fences or irrigation. And everyone I've talked to has been totally fine with having their own contractor come out and move the dog fence, move
Right.
the irrigation, move the sprinklers. They just kind of wanted to know when things would happen.
Yes, yeah,
So the sooner we can get a contractor under contract, then we can potentially put the residents in touch with the contractor to try and get
yeah,
the residents contractor doing a sprinkler system to talk to our contractor so that our contractor doesn't go in and rip everything up, that they know they can communicate.
that would be important for them to have a list of, here's who you call for this, kind of
Yes,
stuff. You have a problem, because I think, it will be disruptive. There isn't any way to put it in without it being disruptive. It's just the way it is. But
Right.
once it's done, it'll be fabulous.
But if you're trying to minimize those
Yeah, try-
disruptions along the way.
Well, and have people understand what they can do if they have a question or a concern. They're not, who do you call? Yeah. SpongeBob SquarePants. Ghostbusters.
Thanks, Ian.
yes.
Thank
Boards and
you.
authorities.
Let's see, finance was actually, the presentation we received from Andrew at the last meeting about what's left over in funding and the collections and so forth was presented to the finance board. So Andrew had considerably more time to make his full presentation. The finance board much appreciated that presentation. And then MRTSA, we have our MRTSA meeting tomorrow evening.
Mhm.
We're due to hear back from the consultant. June?
They'll be here June 10th.
June 10th.
To talk to the commission.
So we will
During
brief,
discussion.
we'll brief MRTSA about that tomorrow.
Resiliency has not met since our last commission, but we meet tomorrow, so should have an update there.
Library board met. Library board met and got to meet with the architect that had presented plans, which Keith has seen, I've seen, the library board has seen. And they came up with some staging phases, et cetera, et cetera.
They took the commission part when you told them, don't limit yourselves.
Let's.
Blame me. Gonna solve the design problem, don't have it.
Certainly would be remiss not to mention what a great event yesterday there was over at the service building and
Yeah,
Chief, appreciate your words and obviously with all the departments. It was a really incredible meeting and nice to get the recognition of the governor and to see, I don't know, everybody out. It was just really, it was an event that made me extremely proud to work here, to be a Mount Lebanon resident, Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. It was all.
and to be an elected official, it paid off.
But it was
Yelling at you, you were like, yeah, but this,
It was a really great meeting and I was proud to be part of it. So.
cool.
School board, or school, I should say, at least one cool update. So this Friday, the school is having their annual art show, Friday, April 25th, 2025, from 7 to 9 p.m. with one change from previous years. And the change is that this year you can purchase the art for sale or purchase the art. So you can do purchase framed or unframed, and you can purchase original or you can purchase prints. The money from the sale will go, so all the proceeds will go to benefit Mount Lebanon Foundation for Education, whose mission is to directly enhance student experiences in the Mount Lebanon School District. So that's pretty cool. They're also gonna have a silent auction, which I understand is being held by the AP Studio Artists and the Student Gallery. So that's it on April 25th, this Friday.
So you can buy the original?
You can buy originals and prints. cool, huh?
So the trick is to bid it up to the parents.
Have their friends show up, they get it up there, yeah.
I had to buy that art once.
Said it.
I had to buy the art once. I've been there.
It'll be fun. I'll be there as well. And then one other thing, the school board had a meeting and discussion on student services and special education, which was a review of some surveys that they had done and an overall program review for special ed, and it's wrapped up in a big presentation that's on their Go board docs. So you go to the school district website and check that out. It's actually an interesting read, and it's in a nice presentation, which lists some of they actually surveyed teachers as well on what they thought of the program, what they thought the current state of special ed was, and where they were lacking or might be lacking, and where it could be improved. So that's pretty cool. And then Eric sent over something related to the public interaction meetings on our Uptown. And I sent it over to the school. They shared that at their last school board meeting, and it'll go to the PTAs too, the ones that meet in time for that meeting. So they'll hopefully share that with some folks.
Cool.
That's it for school.
That's, well, and you're gonna be, over school Friday.
Friday we have the,
Tree City Arbor Day?
thank you. Yes.
Or Tree City, USA.
Yep. Friday, 2:00, is that right? 2:30.
Be there, be square.
Yep. All right. That's it. We got a little time.
We've got some time, so you're gonna get more time.
Gosh.
Yeah, we need that.
Yeah.